Hey, we are in the Haftarah for Vayeitzei, and that is in the book of Hosea, starting with chapter 12, verse 13, all the way to the end, which is 14, verse 10. Now, I wonder if you caught my mistake from last week. We're not actually doing the Haftarah for Vayeshev just yet. So I misspoke. I meant Vayeitzei. We're in the book of Hosea, and I want to tell you that this book has been, for me, a deeply impactful book. Pretty much from the first time that I read it, which was many, many years ago. And Hosea is the book that I kind of turn to over and over again whenever I want to get a sense of what it was that the northern tribes did that caused them to be scattered into the nations and them losing their identity. The idea of a lost identity and then finding one's identity, I guess, I don't know, for some reason kind of resonates with me. So I've always kind of had a special place in my heart for the book of Hosea. I'm probably not the only one who, when first turning to the Torah out of Christianity and having like such a deep love for that left-hand side of our Bibles, I thought, well, maybe I'm Jewish, right? Maybe that's why that would be the only explanation as to why I have such a love for the Torah, right? So, like some people do who are able to, I had a DNA test done, and would you know it, it showed that I have a big fat 0% Jewish DNA. And that intrigued me, made me wonder, okay, well then it can't be that can't be the DNA part. It must be something else, maybe something as simple as God is calling me, one from the nations, back to the Torah. But the other thing that had crossed my mind, and maybe it's crossed your mind a time or two, is this idea of the 10 lost tribes, right? So, and that's not what I'm going to get into. That's not what I'm going to talk about, other than the idea that the 10 northern tribes lost their identity as being part of Israel because of the sins that they committed. And again, the whole book of Hosea kind of talks about that, and how in the end they get restored back to their identity. And so that's always been something that has intrigued me, because I feel like I'm gaining, whatever that might mean, I'm gaining an identity as a daughter of the Most High King. So, because that's kind of like how I have been kind of thinking about Hosea, the hardest part of creating this lesson for you was that there's just like so much more that I want to say about the whole entire book, and so much that I feel like would be important to bring out in this Haftarah lesson. But I have committed to making these videos short and just focusing on one or two topics and then making them applicable to your life. But even still, in me having brought up the whole 10 tribes losing their identity, I do feel like that I need to give at least a little background into the state of the nation Israel that was at the time of the prophet Hosea. Okay, so back a couple lessons ago, remember we talked about the ascension to kinghood of Solomon, who was David and Bathsheba's son, right? Now we're jumping ahead to after his death, when the whole nation of Israel was split into two political entities, represented by a southern kingdom and a northern kingdom. Now David and Solomon, their dynasty, right, that retained the southern kingdom, now called Judah or Yehudah. And at the time of the Haftarah, that was led by Solomon's son, Rehoboam. Okay. Now the northern kingdom, called Israel, this was led by Jeroboam, and he's the one who initiated a revolt against the dynastic kingdom of David, the Davidic dynasty, and he's the one that led 10 of the 12 tribes to follow him instead. Now, because Jeroboam was from the tribe of Ephraim, one of those two tribes of Joseph, the kingdom of Israel, that northern kingdom, is also referred to as Ephraim by the prophets. Now, let me give you a little Bible study tip. Writings that occurred after the northern and southern kingdom splits will refer to Israel, or the nation of Israel, meaning those northern tribes. But writings before this time, like in the Torah, when that uses Israel or children of Israel, that means all of the tribes. And it sometimes can be confusing if you're reading in the prophets or in the Torah and you don't know exactly what is being referred to. Now, I think that this background is important for understanding the references of this Haftarah. So let me keep going just a little bit longer. So Jeroboam did a few strategic things to try to establish the legitimacy of his kingdom. One of them was choosing Shechem for his new capital city. Now remember, Shechem was that first place bought by Jacob in the land of Israel. So Jeroboam choosing Shechem, this was designed to emphasize that the Davidic line that chose Jerusalem, that's relatively new compared to the time-honored and ancient land of Shechem. So you see how Jeroboam is trying to erode the legitimacy of the Davidic kingdom by suggesting that Judah's place of worship in Jerusalem, well, that's a new place compared to the ancient path. It's pretty tricky, right? Another thing that Jeroboam did was he moved his court to Penuel, and that was the place that Jacob wrestled with the angel, the messenger, right? Jeroboam had established two places of worship instead of Jerusalem, right? Wasn't that nice of him to make it convenient for the 10 tribes? That's sarcasm. One of these places was in the very north, and the other altar was at Beit El, and that's the location of Jacob's dream and ladder. So, are you noticing a pattern here? Jeroboam is associating himself with the revered Jacob. Now, because Jeroboam didn't have sacred objects such as those in the temple in Jerusalem, he just substituted new ones. He had golden statues, one for each of the altars, right? One for each of the locations. And you already know the shape of those statues, right? Bulls. But do you know why? Well, bulls, or more specifically the calf, that was the recognized symbol of Joseph. So he's also trying to use Joseph's legacy to try to promote his new worship center in his new ways. So, these golden statues. Now, when the northern tribes worshipped with these calves, they did so during the entire duration of the kingdom of Israel. Now, whether they started out merely as a misguided symbol of worshiping the one true God, they quickly ended up worshiping other physical images and other local gods. Now, Jeroboam and all those later kings of the northern tribes, they shared one thing in common. They were all insecure in their position as king. So each monarch would do things to kind of smooth over their insecurities and ensure the loyalty of the people, instead of looking at what does it mean to be loyal to God. And there were many, many assassinations and usurping of authority in these successive monarchs and in these different kings that came along. Each one never really had that peace, that peace that comes from knowing that you're really doing God's will in God's work. And sometimes for us, when we go about and make a decision kind of without checking in on God, have you noticed that when you do that, you kind of feel unsettled in your spirit? And maybe it's when you feel that way that you work really, really hard to secure that position, whatever that decision was, because you know maybe that you've kind of overstepped and you're out of God's will. Now, the other background that I want to point out is that at the time of Hosea, the northern tribes were actually very prosperous, both materially and militarily. But this was at the same time that the people were very infamous for injustice and fraud, deceit, dishonesty. So this goes to show us that we can't really judge the rightness or the wrongness of a plan or a dynasty based on appearances alone, right? Now, this Haftarah is kind of placed right in the middle, that middle part of Hosea's larger rebuke of Israel for lying and cheating and worshiping idols. And the Haftarah begins with an immediate tie-in with our Torah portion, because the Haftarah starts where Jacob runs away from Esau and he goes to Laban's house, and then he has to deal with Laban. And he kind of deals with Laban on Laban's own terms, right? Well, in this Haftarah, the northern tribes, Israel says that if it was moral for Jacob to lie and cheat, then it would be moral for them too. And the other thing that they claim is that those golden calves that they're worshiping, well, they're just an intermediary to God, just like Moshe was. Now, of course, Hosea responds in anger. He points out that God has shown Israel, has shown the 10 tribes so much kindness, but their actions don't indicate that they have any appreciation for his kindness. Now, I want to emphasize here that the sins of the 10 northern tribes that led to their exile, they were committed during the time that the first temple stood, and God's presence was manifest among the people. Let that sink in. In many real ways, God was less concealed in the world then than he is today. And today, we don't maybe understand the significance of this because we've never lived with that kind of degree of his presence as it was during temple times. And Christianity has kind of downplayed that part of the story, right? Now, it's probably hard for you, I know it is for me, to imagine temple life where God was manifest more fully. And that without a temple, God's presence is even more concealed now than it was then. And this is something that I think I wanted to bring out to you in this lesson. This idea that God's presence is concealed from us by his design. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, according to the sages, within the workings of creation, God wanted to conceal his light and all that that might entail. Because if his light was fully shown, then everything in existence would be infused with that light, right? It would be purified and sanctified by that light, because that's what happens. And humans would be irresistibly drawn to that light. If you've ever been outside on a warm summer day, you turn on the outside lights, you got the bugs that just kind of go right to it, right? That's irresistibly drawn to the light. So whatever we think of as God's light, that needed to be concealed. Why? So free will could exist, right? And in free will, there's a struggle in the choice between right and wrong, tov and ra. Now, the sages also teach that after God created the world, it continued to expand until the seventh day. And that's when God commanded it to stop expanding or to rest, right? So they say the nature of this expansion was the concealment of God's rule on the earth, concealed in the laws of nature, concealed in those things that make it seem as though the earth runs by itself, right? God's presence in this world needed to be concealed in a way so as to give man free choice to recognize him, free choice to choose him. But a limit of those laws of nature, that was needed. Because otherwise, God's presence, his light, would have been totally hidden. And that's not what God wants either. Now, Torah describes the seventh day in terms of God completing his work and resting. He, in a sense, rested from hiding his presence, which is why one of the reasons that Shabbat is a day where God's presence can be felt deeply, where we can feel closest to him. Now, of course, God isn't bound by the parameters of space and time. He's outside those things because he created those things, even though that thought blows our mind. So being close to God, or him being close to us, what that means is there's more of an open revelation of God's light. And to be far or distant from him means that his light is more concealed. But his light is infinite, right? It's never actually more or less. We experience it more or less because of his concealment or revealment. So God has hidden himself in the world so that only those who actively seek him out will find him. But we're not without tools to assist us. He knows that we need help to do that. The sages say that he's given us 4 special things that will assist us in actively seeking him out. And that would be, number 1, his names. Number 2, his Kedusha or holiness, his Torah, and his right hand. That's what the sages say. Now, God is a spirit, right? So his names are descriptions of his attributes. And they can help us understand his actions in this world. When we understand his actions, there's less concealment, right? So whenever we mention his names, and Scripture's filled with different names, because in Hebraic thought, a name is your character. A name is the essence of who you are. When we mention his names, we come closer to him, and our relationship is strengthened. He's revealed. So, make sure to study out his names, look at his attributes, and as you do, you will experience him revealed, not concealed. Then the second one, that word Kedusha, holiness, it literally means separation. We can recognize how different and distinct that he is from everything in creation. Now, if you've ever done an art appreciation course, you know that each artist has like a signature style, right? And so when you recognize that signature style, it kind of makes your viewing pleasure just that much greater, right? Oh, that's a Monet. Oh, that's a Rembrandt. When we catch glimpses of his signature in his handiwork, we can marvel at the maker, right? In the moments that we understand that he's so much other than his created things, we experience a taste of that Kedusha, that holiness, that separateness. He is more revealed to us, which brings us closeness to him. Now, the other day I had this thing happen. So in Montana, where I am in Missoula, in the fall, especially around the University District, and we live kind of close by there, wonderful, wonderful trees that turn these amazing shades of yellow and gold and deep reds and these magnificent like burnt orange. And I love either driving in that area or just walking around to see all of these colors. Fall is my favorite time of year. And it was striking how beautiful these colors were. They were so beautiful to my sense of sight that it was almost overwhelming. And because I had been working on this lesson, I did something a little bit different than what I usually do. Usually I will thank God for these beautiful colors, and that I'm able to experience them. But what I did differently this time, going along with this lesson of separateness, as glorious as those colors were, as magnificent they were, how it lifted my soul and just gave me so much happiness and brightness and love, I was able to realize God is so much more than this, right? He created these colors, and he is separate from that. He's better than that. I hope that makes sense. And I was able to see the artist's signature, right? And as beautiful as the art piece was, it was recognizing that artist in there. And I was able to do that to a deeper level than I have before. And that brought me even more closeness to God. So the third thing is Torah. Now, Torah is the expression of God's will in the world, right? So it makes sense that when we want to see God revealed, not concealed, we turn to Torah, we study Torah, and then those actions of Torah that we carry out, well, that causes his light to be illuminated, right? And whenever his light is illuminated, we feel closeness to him. So here's my encouragement here. I, every day we do little bits of Torah every day. And we don't probably think much of it. I know that I don't. There's many, many times where I am doing God's will and I just kind of go through the motions and I do it and I don't stop to think about it. Now, I'm not suggesting stopping and thinking about it and saying, oh, look at me, I'm so wonderful, I'm doing God's Torah. No, no, no. But when you look at Torah is God's will in the world, even those little things that you do, think about it this way. In this moment, I am causing God's light to be illuminated in the world. Even if what you do, whatever that little Torah thing is just you by yourself, you and God, you're still bringing his light to the world. And when you can stop and think about that, the little bits of Torah, the big bits of Torah that you do, or the little bits or the big bits of Torah that you see in your loved ones, stop a moment and say, oh, God's will has just been illuminated in the world, right? That's a way to recognize him in this world. So he's revealed, not concealed. And then finally, his right hand. And I love this for many, many reasons, but one of the things I love is that we've been learning about in several lessons, right? These Haftarah lessons, that Yeshua is God's right hand. Yeshua is the ultimate illumination of God, the ultimate revealing of God, right? Think of it this way. When we cling to Messiah, because Messiah is the express image of our Father, when we cling to Messiah, we draw down that light of God and illuminate it in the world, right? So don't forget your right sides of the Bible. Don't forget to look at how our Master Yeshua lived and walked this earth, because he was and is a Jew, and so within first century Judaism, and so he would do first century Judaism things, but he also did some things that were unique to him. Now, we as his disciples, and he as our ultimate master, our rabbi, we can learn to do as he did and imitate that. And in the first century, where a rabbi would have their disciples around them, those disciples would do everything that rabbi would do. There's some fun stories that I've read. I think it's probably in the Talmud, right? Where maybe a rabbi had a lisp, or a certain different kind of an accent, and his disciples, wanting to do everything that rabbi would do, they would kind of take on that same lisp or that same sort of accent. So what's really cool is when you can study out the things that the Gospels say about Yeshua, and you can pick out, oh, he did this. This is different. He did this. And when you take on those same actions, you are clinging to Messiah, and you are drawing down the light of God. One of the things that he did was that was a little bit different from normative Judaism. He would pray with his face lifted to the heavens, and I can get you the verses later, but it says it in Scripture. When he and the two walking on the road to Emmaus, right, that whole thing, and then they invited him to dinner, and they didn't know it was Yeshua until he prayed, it said, right? And then they were like, oh, we were with the Master. Well, there was something about how he prayed that made them know, because it was distinct to him, right? So I'm suggesting find things that were distinct in Scriptures, find things that were distinct that Yeshua did, and do those things, because that's how you cling to your rabbi. That's how you cling to your master. And there's other examples that are really cool. So again, we draw down the light of God when we cling to Messiah, because Messiah is that express image of our Father. So this week, look for the revealment of God. And don't be fooled by the concealment. Make sure that you search for him, because he's behind all your circumstances. And he's behind those things that we just assume are nature. Remember that he delights to conceal a matter, and he loves it when his queens search for him. I'll see you next week in the next Haftarah.